So because Pokemon Showdown is currently offline due to server issues, I decided, you know what? Let's do a little personal viability tier list. What's poppin', people? I'm here to give you the D-low on all of your SVNU needs. We got this a little admittedly older template for the viability rankings. However, it has all of the relevant Pokemon on it as far as I'm aware. So, we're gonna work with it. Of course, if you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to leave a like. Subscribe for not already subscribed. Join as a member if you can. Well, let's get into it. So, as you can see, there are a few Pokemon on here that are not in you anymore. That doesn't really matter. We'll just ignore them. As all that really matters is that we have all of the Pokemon that we need to rank. And unless I'm just forgetting something here, we got all of them. So let's go. So the first rankable Pokemon we see is Appleton here. And I'm just gonna go like along the list. Appleton, I am going to put all the way up in A. Because I think what we need to keep in mind as of late is just how much more use this mon is finally getting. I think that's a really good indicator of community consensus changing around the Pokemon. And for good reason. I made a post recently about why I think Appleton should rise to A. And I mean, Specs is an insane wall breaker. You just don't have steel types in the tier. Everything has to Terra if it wants to check you. Outside of a few blanket special walls that can kind of pivot around you. And even then, you see them struggle quite a bit. But beyond Specs, the set you see mostly is that just specially defensive Dragon Tail set. And that's really good because, for starters, you're a surprisingly effective Electros check. Which, that's really good. But also, you're a nice Sandaconda pivot. You can Terra Steel, and you just flip a ton of matchups on their head as well. Think about versus any flying type no longer can spam their Brave Bird versus you. You also become a Steel type that's not weak to fire, which is really fun. But also it helps you versus something like, say, a Terra Fairy Ursaring, which is really nice. And just in general, I think Dragon Tail, with how prevalent spikes are between both Quillfish and Cacturn, I think it's really nice to have. Next up, Basculin. I'll put Basculin B-. And I could probably even say C, because there's really no reason to use Basculin. I'm mostly giving it a little bit extra credit because, and I might be wrong here, so bear with me. It's a little faster than Bruxish, and that does matter versus a couple Pokemon. I believe versus the Oricorios, you actually outspeed them as opposed to being outsped by them. And there is some stuff with Terra that you can do to bypass a couple of the checks to Bruxish a little more easily, i.e. Cacturn and Vaporeon, and even Croak if you want, with like Terra Normal. But it's got a slightly easier time getting by some of those mons. Otherwise, though, it's like wholly outclassed, I'd say, by Bruxish. Even Clawitzer, a little bit better of a wall breaker, because Clawitzer just does not struggle in a lot of matchups to break. You just go for the Terra Dragon Pulse, and you kind of just watch Pokemon get KO'd. But beyond that, yeah, I mean, competition just matters. Bombardier! I'm putting up an A-. I think lately we've seen a little bit more experimentation with Bombardier, with those utility sets that everyone was hyping up before it dropped. We're seeing those get more use now, and they are pretty effective as an alternative kind of stealth rocker. I think the main reason for this was when we lost Copperajah, people did want to... We didn't just want to use Conda on every team. And I mean, Chansey's a great mon, but it's got its own issues. So I think people kind of just moved to Bombardier and are like, okay, let's see. Because you got Stealth Rock, you got Knockoff, you can pivot, you have Roost, so you're durable, you're a Dark Resist, which is really nice because of Zoroark being so prevalent. I mean, hell, you're a Dark type, so you are immune to Psychic, which is really good for Brux. There's a lot to like about Bombardier. Next up, Braviary. Braviary is a really hard mon for me to rank, because I feel like on paper, it does have a lot of traits that should make it decent. It's got, because of the HP stat, decent overall bulk. It's still really strong. It can do a lot of the same stuff as Bombardier. In addition to that, where it's like a pivot, plus it's a defogger. So instead of Stealth Rock, you've got the other side of that. It's just, I'm gonna put Braviary in B. The on-paper stuff at least has me not wanting to put it in B-, where stuff I feel is really getting niche. I like B as, like, you're teetering on viable, or not viable, but meta-relevant. It's just, I feel a lot of time not much reason to use Braviary. Because if I want a flying type, and naturally Pokemon do different things, but if I want a flying type, I'm probably going to go Drifblim because it's a more consistent fogger in my experience. Or I'm going to go Oricorio for the offense, or I'm going to go Bombardier for general utility. There's just... It doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of reason to use Braviary, so... Kinda tough. Like I said, it does have a lot of on-paper traits that I like, and that HP stat makes it kinda nice if you try bulkier sets out. It's sort of like Bombardier, where if you just invest fully in your bulk, you take a surprising amount of random attacks a lot better. But there's still something to that. I feel like you get more mileage out of the other Pokemon because they don't require you to go so out of your way to just make the Pokemon work. I feel like Braviary, you have to run these suboptimal sets, don't really maximize its potential. Whereas with something like a Drifblim, you just throw your bulk, EVs in, and you call it a day. By the way, Bruxish, we're going all the way up to A+. I've seen some people want to play Bruxish a little bit lower. And by a little lower, I only mean down to A. But I think people just... They're a little too comfortable with saying, we got enough offensive counterplay to it. We can pivot around it. And to that I say, oh yeah? Okay. Have fun. I will not partake in that. I think with Bruxish, it's just... It's so awkward to play around because one wrong read often leads you to getting absolutely obliterated. And unlike something like, say... I mean, hell, Specs Appleton. Bruxish has speed. It still has a lot of Pokemon that are faster than it, right? You've got, like, Scarf, Rotom, and Passimian. You've got, like, Jolteon, Paldean Taurus, Zoroark, Oricorio. These are all prevalent Pokemon that do actually give you some issue. But I think the offensive power that the Mon offers makes up for that quite a lot. Because when you look at defensive counterplay, you can pivot around it because, you know, Psychic and Water both have common immunities. The problem is if you play the immunity incorrectly, say I try switching a Bombardier in on a Scyfanx, if I get Wave Crashed, I am gone. If I try switching a Croakin on Wave Crash and I get Psychic Fanged, I am gone. And so that's a little annoying. Terra does help, because something like Croak could Terra Dark in a 1v1, and then you don't really care about the Brux anymore. But, of course, that's contingent on the opponent staying it. So, it's not so simple as just, okay, I 1v1 because I Terra as they Psychic Fangs me. A little bit more nuance. I really like Bruxish just because as a breaker, I don't feel like there's a ton that does it better. And I think the synergy that Bruxish has with Oricorio is also really nice. Not a Mon you see as often as you would like to anymore, else I'm scrolling down because I'm trying to find where Oricorio is. Here we go. But I still just really value that offensive core a ton, even if Oricorio doesn't feel like it's as good anymore. Bruxish is probably like the best way to enable it, so I rate it pretty highly. Next up we have Cacturn. I'm going to put Cacturn in A. This might feel a little high. I think Cacturn's kind of teeter. If you could somehow have like an A with only a half a minus, I'd probably put Cacturn there. It just feels like A is too high for it, but admittedly, it's a very, very functional Pokemon. Because the traits it has are just really good. I mean, water immunity is great, because you're a Bruxish check, you could take any of its hits pretty darn well outside of, like, you know, Terra Blast Fairy, or Ice Fang or Poison Fang. You're a Spiker, and there's, like, one other viable one, so pretty easy to find a niche there. You have really strong priority if you go Sucker Punch. You have a really strong Leaf Storm that lets you potentially lure in and just Oko Passimian if they get greedy. And you just got a ton of utility moves that are really fun to experiment with, like Encore and Leech Seed. There's a lot of options when you're building with Cacturn, which I think does help, because it's not just, okay, random Spiker utility mon, like Quillfish generally is perceived as. And I like some of these other options because they do actually lend it pretty well to dealing with otherwise awkward matchups. So like something like a Muck that keeps switching it on you, you can at least keep Leech Seeding it. And if you think they're going to get greedy and T-Spike, say you stay in and spike up, you can an Encore lock into T-Spike. And just gain momentum like that. Or again, with the Passimian, you could have Life Orb Leaf Storm and absolutely smash it on the Switch. I think that versatility is kind of underrated. And I think it's really easy to laugh off Cacturn as just an otherwise, you know, troll pick, because what was the last time Cacturn was genuinely viable in NU? It would have been Gen, like, 4. Maybe it was viable at a period of Gen 5. I don't play enough Gen 5, really, to comment. But we're talking about a matter of a decade, so I get the hesitancy to accept this as a very good Pokemon, but hey, it is. And yeah, next up's Camerupt. Camerupt's a little bit of a tricky Pokemon to rank, because it's sort of the Basculin issue where it's not that it's not a functional Pokemon, there's just not really much reason to use it. I'm putting it in B- because it does have going for it that it is resistant to fire. So a little bit different from Kondo, where you run into a Pyroar, you are not switching in. You're running into an Oricorio, you are always getting obliterated. But I think just being a ground type on its own offers at least some semblance of a niche. Even if losing out on the rock resist is pretty big, losing out on Glare's overall utility is pretty big, losing out on the sustain that Sandaconda has is pretty big. Like, there are a lot of things that do hold Camerupt back, but I still think it's a pretty effective general status spreader, because, you know, instead of Paralysis with Glare, you've got Burns with Will-O-Wisp or Lava Plume. You've got Sleep with Yawn. There's some stuff to like about the Pokemon, I just think it is still a little hard to justify. Carkle's not viable, that's all I'll say. Chansey, I'd probably still put an A. I know people don't love it because it is very passive and it's running the same 4 moves every time you see it. It is Stealth Rock, Seismic Toss, Soft Boiled, and Thunder Wave without fail. And while that does mean there are quite a few Pokemon that can just blanket, you know, anything with sub, especially if it's Terra Ghost, makes it even worse. A Rotom. Like, Rotom is always just coming in versus you and saying hello. I am acquiring my real estate. You know, Terra Ghost Jolteon as well doesn't even need sub because you got Volt Absorb. So you can just see him up versus Chansey and beat it eventually. But I think just the general insurance of it being so obscene on the special side is really nice. It just covers for so much, and even though it's really easy to predict Chansey coming in, just momentum lock it, I think the fact that it just denies so many special wall breakers any sort of progress that they'd otherwise get in matchups, there is at least something to that. And look, just like with a lot of other Pokemon, Terra can make up for some of Chansey's shortcomings. I think being able to Terra Fairy against a Passimian is pretty valuable. You still don't want to stay in versus it necessarily, because you could just get knocked, and losing a Violite is a huge hit to your bulk. But there's a little bit of room for making those, you know, not so good matchups a little bit more bearable. I can definitely see the argument to put it in A-, because realistically, beyond setting up Stealth Rock and kind of existing, Chansey doesn't do a ton. I just think that what it does do is enough to keep it in A. Maybe not for too much longer, but I'm going to exercise a little bit of caution before dropping it. And Clawitzer, I'll put in B+. It's not that Clawitzer is falling off, I just feel like a lot of Pokemon are running Terra Fairy more frequently that give it a lot of issues. And while Clawitzer can respond to this with starting to run Sludge Bomb more, which it has, well, no, not Sludge Bomb, Flash Cannon. It can run Flash Cannon a little bit more and have, you know, a little bit of advantage versus, say, a Chansey if it goes for Terra, or a Vaporeon. I don't really like locking into that kind of move. It might get you a KO, and that is, at the end of the day, sometimes all you need. It doesn't feel like it's as simple to wall break with as it used to be with Claw. And then it is kind of slow as well, so you'll get matchups where it just doesn't feel all that useful unless you can get the positioning correct with it. So, a little bit of struggling in my experience with it. But beyond that, I mean, if you're not running into a Vaporeon, a lot of time Clawitzer does have a field day. Because you think about a lot of the common Pokemon that it pivots into and just exploits. I mean, Sandaconda's at the top of that list. Drifblim's up there. Not like Blim can really do anything back to you. What's it gonna do? Burn you with Will-O-Wisp? Okay. It's not really something that you're all too concerned with. Even something like an Oricorio, you could definitely be pivoted in on if they're trying to get greedy for setup versus a Passimian. So you turn on it. But Quillfish, which is really common, you're coming in on and you're happy about it. So, opportunities wall break are still pretty free. They just require you to get that pivot support going or make some really ballsy plays. Which I think does limit its efficiency just a tad. Got Barrage of Rose, obviously, so we can't talk about it. Crabominable's a hard one. Because Crab, we had it getting use back in Goodra times. And then when Goodra got banned, Crabominable immediately vanished. Because I think mostly people were using it as a response to Goodra, because you could pivot into it at least once with an Assault Vest set. You were very well paired up with Vaporeon, so you could stay healthy with Wish. But now there's not really that need, I guess, people feel, to run this kind of just blanket, you know, like, kind of tank, I'll describe it, where it's really strong, but also still gives you a lot of insurance defensively. I'd still probably rate Crab at around a B at least, because Crab as a breaker is still quite good, and Special Bulk, just out of nowhere, is still helpful against a good amount of Pokemon. I mean, you look at the ones we haven't ranked yet, it's nice to be able to have a check to something like Jolteon, or even the Oricorios, because you have Terra, of course. Something like Indeedee as well, you've got Terra to potentially help against. I think the issue is just the... It's like, this is good and bad. The meta's gotten really pivot-centric lately. Like, even more so than it used to be, and it's always been pretty heavily centralized around pivots. And that helps Crab because, you know, not the best defensive typing, kind of slow, so you do want that support to get in and start throwing off your attacks. But it also sucks because a lot of Pokemon will just keep vortexing you the entire game. It's like, you can't really check a Jolteon by raw switching in because it probably just volts on you and then brings in, you know, anything else. You can't really check an Assault Vest Electros because same reason. Rotom, same reason. Also, you might get burned. But I still like it generally. Crocolore, I'm putting in C, and I know a lot of people think that's too low. My take has always been this. This mon is staple to stall, and if stall is not particularly viable, then this mon is not particularly viable. And right now, that's kind of how I view the meta. I think Croc is just not worth using outside of stall, even on balance. And so I just don't see a reason to use it. The issue I've encountered as well is, and it's more playing against Crocolore, as long as I can get my hazards up, my opponent is now playing with one less Pokemon. Because the mod just doesn't do anything. It's just kind of a do-nothing wall that once it loses out on 25% of its HP, a lot of 3-hit KOs immediately get turned into 2-hit KOs. It's really hard to play with Stealth Rock up. Even one little spike I have seen make the difference versus Croc. I mean, in terms of like playing against it too, there's not really like a limited pool of Pokemon that switch into this and just deny it progress. And although Croc's never the mon tasked with making progress, it still sucks when so many things could switch into you with impunity and just say, okay, try and make progress versus my team. Try to do literally anything. You know, you got any water type in the tiers able to do that really consistently. You've got some of the more niche options like Pyroar and Houndoom, they can still do that. Even something like Muck doesn't want to take the Willow necessarily, but Muck can kind of just come in and threaten poisons versus you all day, which is not really fun. Even Sandaconda's kind of annoying, because your Flamethrower, yeah, it does a decent chunk, but you still gotta deal with the Conda coming in, threatening the glares, threatening to just EQ you even, and get Shed Skin immediately every turn. Not fun. Not fun. Anyhow, Doc Spun. I'm putting it in C as well. It's really passive and really bad. The set I've seen that works the best is probably those Wish Tech with Roar sets, because they are actually kinda hard to take advantage of. But, as like, the best competition I could think for it is the Evolutions, because they're also Wish Passers that commonly turn into Fairy types. So you kinda get everything Doc Spun would do, but on those Pokemon. And so that kind of hard to keep up with. I think as well, the reason it sucks to be a fairy type, like Darkspun, in this tier, is what Pokemon are you like trying to check? Well, Mabostiff could come into mind, but lately it's a lot more about Zoroark. And your special bulk ain't that good, and Zoroark is Sludge Bomb pretty frequently, so you're just getting tossed. You're getting tossed into the bin pretty quickly. You give Muck free turns really, really, really easily. So that's not very good. It's been like, Croak can always come in versus you. Yeah, it can come into you, because your player just doesn't do that much damage. And if you run Body Press as your only attack, or even alongside it, I mean, it's not helping much, if at all. I just think Amon gives up way too many free turns, and for what it's supposed to do, it doesn't do it very well. So yeah, okay, I have to Terra with my Vaporeon to have a, Fairy-type Wish Passer. But that's such a big opportunity cost. Not really. I mean, Vaporeon using its Terra generally is more helpful, I would say, than harmful. Just gives you a nice edge against things like Dragon Pulse Claw Witzer, opposing Zoroark. It's pretty low drawback. Next up, Drifblim. I'll keep it an A+. Some people have come down a little bit on Blim lately, but in my view, it's still one of the top 10 or so Pokemon in the format. It's very much like Chansey, where it doesn't do a ton. I just think that what it does, it's still very, very proficient at doing. You kind of just sit around, throwing off Defogs, Will-O-Wisps, Strength Saps, and it's not exactly easy to play against. I'd say the difference between the two really just comes down to how many Pokemon can consistently take advantage of Drifblim without being annoyed. Because frankly, the access to Will-O-Wisp and T-Wave both makes that a lot harder to do. Because, Will-O-Wisp Blim, something like a Rotom doesn't really want to come in still because he got Hex. Eel doesn't want to come in because getting burned is terrible for it, whether you're Coil or Assault Vest. You either get crippled entirely with Coil sets and it can't sweep, or if you're Assault Vest, you're just now taking damage every turn and you don't really recover it back too easily. Zoroark doesn't want to come because of T-Wave threat, or even just getting Illusion broken on an unlucky turn. Bombardier doesn't like anything that you get thrown its way. It's just the utility moves I feel from Drifblim combined with the normal attacks that it can even run. It's still pretty passive, but at least it can bother switch. It's a lot harder to just blanket by switching something in. Whereas with Chansey, it's like, yeah, there are some pretty well-established mons that just give hell to this Pokemon. Next up, Dunsparce. I will keep saying Dunsparce an A+. I know people voted down to A. I don't care. It is hard to build with. I don't feel like a lot of teams necessarily want Dunsparce. It's a mon you gotta build around. You don't build into Dunsparce. But with how good Muck is lately, I think those T-Spikes teams with Dunsparce are pretty potent. Especially because, any bulky setup sweeper pairs well with T-Spikes. But also, you look at what Dunsparce's answers are, there's not a ton of them beyond offensive pressure. No steel types make throwing off Boom Burst also really nice, and as of late, I've seen a little bit more people being like, you know what, let's get at least a little bit of them special attack EVs in there. Let's get them going. And it makes throwing off Boom Bursts early and mid-game a little bit more fruitful. It's not like you're wall breaking for yourself necessarily, but you are making a little bit of progress. And what exactly is coming in onto Dunsparce and saying, okay, yeah, I beat you now? Beyond like Appleton with Terra Steel being kind of annoying to take out because of Apple Acid and Leech Seed, not a ton of things. Let's look at the list. What here is like consistently threatening out to Dunsparce? Maybe Haunter with like Trick as a threat? Maybe just some of the really strong physical breakers can worry it, but even then it's like, you're not that concerned. Because a lot of the time, since you're pumping in so many EVs into physical bulk, you're still relatively safe against them. They could threaten damage on you, no doubt about it. But they're not threatening to just OHKO you. And the ones that are, you have Terra for. Something like a Passimian or a Metacham or a Toxicroak. It's not the play around you turning into a Ghost type at moment's notice. So I think it's just a very effective Pokemon still. And the rise of Muck, with, because it always runs T-Spike, basically, it just solidifies its spot in the meta to me. Eel. It is still S rank. I'm not going to explain this. We know what Eel does. Coil sets are insane. Assault Vest is just nice glue. Talked enough about Eel. Electrode, I'm actually going to keep unranked. I think the main thing that was giving Electrode viability at one point is when the tier was felt really kind of put in a stranglehold by Passimian. Trode was kind of cool because you were a fast mon that outran Scarf Pass. But now, people don't seem as, like, worried about Passimian as they used to be. So I don't think Electrode's niche is all that important. It still does some cool stuff, i.e. being able to, like, lure in and smash Passimian with Terra Blast. But I think Jolteon's just better for that at this point, and it's similarly, you know, obscenely fast. Not to the degree of Electrode, but still fast enough. Fara Giraffe, I am going to keep voting you A-. People need to stop voting my mans down. I love the Double Dance sets. I will continuously speak highly of them. That's all. Again, no steel types in the format definitely helps it as well, because you don't have to necessarily dedicate your Terra now to getting by them. You can instead run, like, Terra Blast with Terra Fairy, and just keep your stab regardless of whether you use Terra or not, which is pretty cool. And of course, dark types don't check you really at all because of that as well, which is, I think, very, very useful. Something like a Chansey or an Assault Vest Eel, they don't keep up too well because stored power eventually just forces your way through them. And there's some cool techs as well with Fara Giraffe. I think Terra Electric in particular is a very cool one. For two reasons, of course. One, you bypass Vaporeon a lot more easily, so you don't have to contend with the hazing. And then two, T-Wave denial. You don't have to worry about something like a Chansey T-Waving you, so you could just boost up to infinity against it. And then not care. Flapple I'm gonna unrank. In theory, it's good enough to be C, but I'm just gonna try and clean up my rankings a bit and keep it to what I really feel is worth using. And a lot of time it's just use Appleton. I think Appleton offers a lot more to you. I think Cacturn as a wall breaker as well offers a lot more to you. Lurantis as a grass type slot offers a ton more for you. Flapple is at that point where it's usable but not viable in my eyes. Where there's a very obvious opportunity cost, I think, to it, because it does so little for you and is so inconsistent. Flareon I'm unranking, I'm not ranking, I'll say, because I think we already unranked it. I think the reasons are pretty obvious. Frostmoth isn't in you anymore. Glaceon's an interesting one, because it probably is good enough to be ranked. Especially with the whole Inu has no steals thing. So its limited coverage isn't that big of a deal like it used to be. And of course, Freeze Dry is pretty cool for beating up Vapo. I will put Glaceon in C. A little reluctantly, but I will place it in C. I think, and this is definitely a moment notice thing, or spur of the moment thing. If you ask me whether I'd rank Glaceon in a couple hours from now, there's a good chance I'd say no. But I think, at least on paper, it's kinda okay. So we'll keep it ranked. And also, like, the fire types in the tier. What fire types do you see? Look at all the ones that are down here. They're either offensive, they don't resist your ice moves, or they're bad. So, probably good enough at least to be ranked. Glamet, I'll unrank. Again, usable, but I don't think to the point where I care enough to rank it. I think I'd rather just use Stealth Rock, Lead Bombardier, and call it a day. Go-Go, trash. No one uses it. The reason I'd actually unrank it is every time I have run into it, that mon has not been able to successfully sweep. And maybe it's because the teams I build are consistently really good in a Go-Go, but I think it's another one. It's another example of one of those mons that takes a really long time to get going, a la Dunsparce. The issue is it's not nearly as strong without the boosts. And Grass Normal, if you run your dual stabs, isn't very inspiring. You gotta contend with Oricorio, you gotta contend with Haunter, you gotta contend with even just Quillfish being so bulky and being able to get the Toxic off on you. So you gotta play around that. And playing around with your coverage is a little difficult, because your options are like Earthquake, Rock Slide, and a lot of these don't really fix your overall coverage issues, depending on opposing Terra. So, like, if you go Grass, Rock, You still get blanked by anything that has Terra Steel, which kind of sucks. Eel would be like the specific one we think of there, I'd say. There are a couple others. Occasionally Rotom runs Terra Steel, for example. It's just... I don't think it's very fruitful to use. I'd rather use another bulky setup sweeper than it, basically 100% of the time. Golduck, I'll put in C still. I still think Manual Rain is good enough to justify it. And I've used it, so I'm speaking from my experience. It is, frankly speaking, good enough. That is the bar we're hitting with it. Hatcham, I am also going to put in B+. I really like Calm Mind Hat, and I do think those pivot sets are at least good enough to where you can put them on teams. They do... Hatcham in general, I really like for supporting Scyther, and, when we rank it, it'll be in, like, A+. And I think supporting an A+ Pokemon is very nice. Also, though, think about, like, any of the flying types. A lot of them do end up taking Knock if they're trying to switch around Passimian. And having that Magic Bounce Spawn to make it a little less punishing if you get knocked and lose heavy-duty boots is pretty cool. Haunter, Haunter's tricky, because I could actually see Haunter in A. Also, I've decided I'm going to move Chansey to A-, because I've spoken it into my mind that this is actually just worth doing. So, every reason I said Chansey might be A- instead of A, just remember that. Recall that. Recall that real quick. But I'm Haunter in A. I really like this mon as of late. I think finally it's getting the use to justify all the hype around the buffs it got with Nasty Plot, Focus Blast. I think T-Spikes is new, and if it's not new, well, people are using it, so that's fun. Just a very solid Pokemon. The immunities it has also are just so nice. Fighting immunity plus normal immunity plus ground immunity is a ton. And it lets you pivot around to quite a few things. Being able to, blank Chansey if your sub is obviously insane. Being able to make any of the choiced fighters annoyed is insane. Sub as well versus Sandaconda, potentially, if they're not Stone Edge. Insane. You just have so much defensive utility put into a Pokemon that probably shouldn't have any of it, combined with some insane offensive power. It's a great example of a Pokemon where I'm like, if you ask me how to check this, I'm gonna tell you, don't let it in. Because there are just some Pokemon that are like that. Not every Pokemon has super cohesive defensive counterplay, and I do feel Haunter's one of them, because yeah, it's got a ton of coverage options. Focus Blast, Gleam, Sludge Bomb, Shadow Ball, Energy Ball, T-Bolt. You got a lot of moves that you do have to try to consider on a game-to-game basis. And so, nothing's like 100% safe as a guaranteed counter. There's always going to be a little bit of a tech that Haunter could run. And so, you take advantage of its weak point. Weak point for Haunter? There's still enough Pokemon that outspeed it to where you can have multiple on a team. And the bulk is awful. So, if you keep up offensive pressure versus a Haunter, it's going to really struggle. Also, Sucker Punch. You got Bombardier as a common Sucker Puncher, you got Cacturn, Croak as well, and then I guess if you want to look at uncommon Pokemon, you could throw in Honchkrow. Speaking of Honchkrow, I'm going to put it like B-. Honchkrow's just at that point where it probably is higher, but why am I using Honchkrow? I remember I haven't mentioned this in a video, but someone asked, why is Honchkrow low on the VR? I thought it was good, and it's like, yeah, it is. Or no, it was why it dropped to PU. I thought it was good, and I'm like, yeah. It's fine. That's just about it. It's fine. It's still a really strong breaker. I think the issue for it is to wall break, you have to use Brave Bird, because your other stab attack is Sucker Punch. Not really a wall breaking tool. And so with Sandaconda is one of the most prevalent physical walls in the tier, and is probably going to switch into your Honchkrow every time you have Honchkrow out. It's very easy to get very, very quickly worn down by Rocky Helmet, Brave Bird Recoil, Stealth Rock if it's up. The one often ends up KOing itself before it even KOs something else, or to KO something else, which I don't really enjoy having to do. Houndoom I'm going to put in B- for like similar reasons of why would I use it. It doesn't help that Vaporeon is super common, and although you can run like Terra Grass to help out with Vapo, the issue for that is Vaporeon has Protect, That's one of the more awkward ones to try and lure in with Terra, because it can scout you. And then you still have to try and break through any other generic special wall, like Assault Vestile, like Umbreon, like Chansey. All of these Pokemon, of course, being very, very hard to beat. Muck as well is another nice one to mention. Very easily revenge killed as well. Sibian's everywhere, and a lot of the other just fast Pokemon obliterate Houndoom, making it pretty hard to get that consistent run out of. Also, we have so many more Pokemon to go. This video's gonna be like an hour and a half. Oh no. But yeah, I also think the competition with Pyroar, even if Pyroar isn't the most common Pokemon ever, it still exists, because I think Pyroar finds it an easier time to just stay and throw off attacks, because look at Pyroar's base speed, it's like 106. Yeah, 106. So you're above even the Zoroark Scyther threshold. Like, relevant Pokemon that I can name that outspeed Doom, but don't outspeed Pyroar. You've got Scyther, you've got Zoroark, you've got Paldean Tauros. And although it's only 3 Pokemon, these are 3 very common Pokemon. 3 of the most common, you know, just general fast mons, even if they're not. Paldean Tauros isn't really viewed as a fast mon, but base 100 speed's really nice. So you got 3 really common Pokemon that outspeed both of you. You wall break about the same amount of effectiveness. Wall break with the same amount of effectiveness. Just kind of sucks to be Houndoom. Indeedee, putting B+. And obviously if male Indeedee were to not remain unbanned, but get unbanned, then female Indeedee loses all viability. But I place it at around B+, with room to be A-. I think the speed has mattered when I've used, like, specs on it. There, again, you talk about between female and male Indeedee. How many Pokemon outspeed it? Well, let's see. Rotom Frost, Bruxish, Oricoreos. There's something else as well, I believe. Oh, I mean, Haunter, guarantee outspeeds you as well, anything at base 95. And you also are forced to speed tie with Toxicroak. Whereas with male Indeedee doesn't have to speed tie with Croak, outspeeds all those Pokemon, and then at least has a speed tie with Haunter. So speed does matter, because you're talking about Pokemon that don't offer a ton defensively, and as a result are pretty easy to revenge kill. You want to make sure you can limit that pool of revenge killers as best as you can. Next up, Jolteon. Put Jolteon up in A. Mana's very good. It's very easy with Jolteon to just get to Volt Switch for the entirety of a game, and not really be punished for it. Because what are our common Volt Switch blockers? Well, we have Sandaconda. Oh, it's not ranked, yeah. We got Sandaconda. That mon is getting blasted by Terra Ice. Without fail, everyone will Terra turn 1 and KO you. Or you have opposing Jolteon, which, I mean, if I have to Shadow Ball an opposing Jolteon once or twice, I will. Otherwise, a lot of the time, it's just, again, offensive pressure, which is much harder when you talk about the fastest unboosted Pokemon in the tier. Or you have people just trying to, you know, maybe go like Appleton and just say, okay, I'll take just not much from Volt here, and then hope that whatever they bring in, I'm okay against. And of course, this makes Calm Mindset super duper potent, because limited pool of revenge killers. In terms of like the 1v1, there's plenty that beats Jolteon, but its effect on games just by spamming Volt and being so scary to ever try and block the Volt due to Terra Blast's threat, I think you gotta respect it enough to put it in A. Next up is Cloth. Well, Cloth with like B-, and this is maybe even too high, but again, it has Knockoff, it has Stealth Rock, it has Regenerator. Cloth is like at least a little more viable than Crocolore in my eye, even if Cloth is mostly just tied to Stall. There's a little bit of extra use case, because Flying Resists and NU aren't the best when you look at durability's sake, like in Rock, Magneton, Rotom, and in Sandaconda, not a Flying Resist, but still a Montassu switching into them. They don't take those hits super well, if it's physical flying type moves at least, and so having a mon that can do that is kinda cool. I think this one takes those hits super duper well. So I'll give it a little more respect for now. Lilligant, I will not rank because I've talked about in the past, this mon has 4 Terra slot syndrome where you want like 50 different Terra types. 4 Terra slot. Terra slot, or whatever I said. It has one Terra type syndrome, where you have like 50 you want, you only can use one. Oh god. I'm still waking up, I'm sorry guys. And of course, like, Muck always is existing, giving you hell. If I use Lurantis, not Lurantis, if I use Lilligant, it means I'm not using Lurantis. Just not a good Pokemon, not at all. Lurantis, on the other hand, though, but not an A-. It's a little awkward timing because Muck is so good right now, and I think Muck, in part, is solidifying its spot on the meta once again because Lurantis is one of the top 3 defoggers, and Muck just kind of says, okay, defog versus me. Do it! It's very easy for Muck to just perpetually come in against Lurantis and say, okay, that T-Spike, it's going right back up. And that kind of sucks. Re-entry to one of the best mons in the tier, and frankly several others even, like Appleton, like Drifblim, Cacturn to some extent, Haunter to some extent. Kind of just sucks. But I still like the consistency at which Lurantis defogs with overall. And in having a check to things like Jolteon, Eel, Sandaconda, I think that's really valuable as well. Lycanroc, A- for it. Because, again, it's really easy to revenge kill. But defensively, there's not a ton that's super great at taking its hits. Because when I think of defensive switch-ins to Stone Edge, it's like Sandaconda, not really anything else. And Sandaconda has to play around Terra fighting CC, sending it back to Uzbekistan, so that's not, you know, the funnest. Even Terra flying can be kind of annoying because, you know, oh, I'm immune to ground now. Oh, and I resist fighting from something like a Passimian. It's always going to be super hard to find a good turn to set up, because Lycanroc's bulk is in the negatives. It does not take attacks. But if you can set up on a force switch versus, say, an Oricorio, might not be too bad. Mabostiff. Mabostiff's so hard to rank. I'm going to get a little fancy with it, and I'm going to put Mabostiff in A-. As a wall breaker, yeah, the power is undeniable. However, it's also linked specifically to Stakeout. So, when Mabostiff is failing to force the switches that it wants to, it does not do damage worth being worried about. How many times have we seen me 1v1 Mabostiff with a Lurantis because I get so stubborn and refuse to switch out? At least 3 times, I'd say. Out of a total of maybe like 4 or 5. And those, you know, other 1 or 2 times because I got crit. So that's a pretty good success rate, all things considered. But that's always been Mabostiff's issue, and it's kind of like the same as Thievel's issue when it was viable in Gen 8 NU, where these are not particularly strong Pokemon. Mabostiff's definitely more naturally powerful, but the moves they use are just so weak. If you know, you know. And so when you're not able to make Pokemon actually switch, your wall breaking capabilities, I mean, they're literally cut in half, or cut in 2/3. I don't remember how good Stakeout is. But that's a lot of power to lose. And if you're a wall breaker that's, again, not really offering much defensively, you kind of need to hope your opponent wants to switch. So if you can't get them to be forced to switch, it's kind of tough. And Terra exacerbates this issue, because a Pokemon you may normally force to switch, like Chansey, it could just Terra into a Fairy, Thunder Wave you, and yeah, then Chansey's beating you 1v1. I mean, Chansey's beating you. Drifblim, the same thing. I could turn into a Fairy, and then I could Will-O-Wisp you, and then you have lost. So I've not been really, ever since Zoroark really picked up in usage, I've kind of felt Zoroark has just taken over from Mabostiff, as it like that potent dark type breaker. And although Mabostiff's naturally still really hard to play against because, well, it is so strong, it is forcing switches still pretty effectively. I feel like there's still a lot of leeway teams have around it. Magneton. Magneton's a weird one. It's like, I want to put Magneton at A- because analytics specs is absurd. At the same time, no one uses a spawn. I'll put it in A-. I think still as a breaker. Again, you're not running Magnet Pull because there's no reason. I don't care about trapping Berserker. But analytic? Ooh. What I think I've liked, not liked, but seen the most. Hated playing against is like Terra's Steel with Steel Beam. And oh my lord, you blast back even AV Electros. It is very scary. It's just very scary. And I mean, I guess you do actually trap some steals, but, you know, again, you're hoping something like an Appleton goes for Terra. Beside the point, though. Analytic is so nice, because even just getting extra damage from Volt Switch against a foe like, say, Appleton or Chansey is quite nice long-term. And let's talk about, again, what Pokemon are actually trying to switch into you that can throughout the duration of the game. Maybe AV Electros. Even with Analytic, you still resist Magneton stab moves, so it is an okay matchup. And then from there, I mean, every electric type's offensive. You know, maybe a max HP Rotom appears, but that doesn't really do anything back to you. You're beating it 1v1. And something like the Jolteon's just not bulky enough. So it's just a really, really good breaker. And you at least offer some utility as a steel type, even if you're not very bulky. Masquerain we will not be ranking because I think Sticky Web's unviable. Metacham, I'm getting another Pokemon thrown into A-. There's a couple. So, Metacham struggles a little bit, because it's like the 4th best fighting type in the tier. You talk about not offering defensive utility at all. I mean, Passimian offers some because it's just kind of physically bulky. Paldean Taurus is the same way, where it's just kind of bulky and has Intimidate. And then Toxicroak, I mean, look at all the defensive utility it got from Dry Skin alone. And so, it already becomes a little harder to use Metacham because it offers less to a team. It is just a strong Pokemon, and nothing else. But, so, okay, why is it still A-? Well, it's a strong Pokemon, nothing else, but damn is it strong. Damn is it strong. And so, that alone still is a lot of value. You could build around Metacham and say, okay, I want to have this nuclear wall breaker on my team. How best do I maximize this thing, despite it offering virtually nothing else? Because look at all the physical walls in the tier. You can beat them. Conda is getting smashed by CC. Drifloon is getting smashed by Elemental Punch here. And then from there, I mean, what other physical walls really switch into you? I guess Hatchram, but that's still not the most common of Pokemons. Vespiquen's kind of fallen off. Spiritomb, who? Quillfish gets sent packing by Zen Headbutt. Is just... It's such a good breaker, and I still kind of want to put it in A. The opportunity cost to using it... I'll put it in A- for now. We'll look back at the list at the end. Mischievous. I like it in B+. I really like those Taunt Nasty Plot sets. They have a lot of leverage around so many defensive Pokemon. Chansey? No more. You talk about Conda? No more. You talk about... Oh, where's another Pokemon I can name here? Muck, even? Muck's a little more annoying because Poison Jab poisoning. But, hey. I can at least taunt it and switch to something else, which might actually be a decent game plan a lot of the time. I mean, something like a Dunsparce, even. You could taunt it and not let it set up versus you, at least. Go for a plot and then, like, Terra Fairy the next turn. As its Shadow Ball won't do enough to, you know, 1v1 you in one turn. Which is nice, at least. Muck. Now, this is the question. Is Muck an S-rank mon now? Or is it still A+? This is where some people would say keep S-. I don't care. I don't want to keep S-. I'm putting S. I think Muck, as a special wall, it's just so good. The defoggers in the tier don't really beat it, because you just status them, or you beat them in the case of Lurantis outright. Hatchram doesn't really want to try and deny you your T-Spikes either, because it's just going to get poison jabbed. So if it's not Rest Talk, which I think it should always be Rest Talk if you're using it for purely utility purposes. But if it's not, because it's either CM, well, that's no longer really beating you. You are a fight resistant, so you can panic check something like a Passimian in a pinch. Terra's incredible for this, because like Terra Dark is super cool versus Bruxish and Entity. It's a very good Pokemon. That's all I can say about it. It's really good. Oricorio Bale. I'm putting it in A-. The spawn could be S. and I don't think I'd bat an eye. I'm putting an A-. I mean, we remember the last live I did with this. How much did that mon do in that game? I think I used Revelation Dance twice, and that was it. It just feels like teams don't let Oricorio set up so easily anymore. And even if you do, a lot of the time a team still has a way to not let you sweep. So say like, you know, a Dragon Tail Appleton with Terra Steel. That doesn't let you sweep. AV Electros still, like, generally contains you. Muck, you know, rising Pokemon, you need multiple boosts before you can consider beating a Muck. And then you gotta play around, like, potential priority moves. You've gotta store Spec, Lycanroc, Accelerock, Bruxish, Jet. And if you already burned your Terra, well, good luck. Pau, I will not rank. I don't think there's any reason to use this. Oricorio Bale is already kind of struggling. I say it's A-, but it's kind of struggling already to have a niche. And this mon just, there's no reason to use it. Passimian is S. I am not elaborating. Berserker, I will put an A-. I could see it honestly still being only B+. But I think being the only fully evolved steel still has some merit. Not necessarily because it's fully evolved, but because it's, you know, the only steel. And being a fully evolved means you at least have the stats to back it up, usually. The Assault Vest sets that I've seen from Toki are also pretty, like, good. Fake Out is a surprisingly nice little insurance tool. Just because having that, you know, I'll say random priority. It's nice when you're facing some, you know, out-of-nowhere offensive threat. So, containing something like a Jolteon a little bit more easily is nice. Containing something like, I don't know, a Metacham, that can be pretty nice. Even having just the extra ability to revenge kill a wall breaker that's not that fast, but outspeeds you, i.e. a Clawitzer, that's still pretty nice to have around as well. And the Stealth Rock sets, I mean, they're probably okay. I'll say as much as that. Pyroar, let's finally put something not an A-. Pyroar, I'm putting B+. I just don't think it's as good as it had been, because the meta is very good at containing it through Volt Looping. And if you run into a Vaporeon, or a Muck, or an Appleton, the games just get a lot more difficult for you, because it's not so simple as to how you make your progress. You still have Taunt Wisp, and that's always kind of good at shutting down the bulkier Pokemon. And, you know, say you Wisp a Muck. I mean, the mon's a lot less useful from there, because you're just not doing the same kind of damage. But there's still the threat of getting poisoned if you try to take the 1v1. If you don't taunt it, it might just T-Spike in your face, and then, you know, gotta try and play around that. And you've got a smaller pool of revenge killers. The problem, of course, being, still, that Passimian is a Pokemon in NU. Literally most common Scarfer. So, you're always dealing with that. I think, means I don't have it in A-, even though I think it's still kind of teetering there. I think the effectiveness of these guys is a tad higher. Pyro on a game-to-game basis, it feels like when you run into a Vaporeon, the game just becomes so much more just impossible to do anything with a Pyro against. I think a lot of these mons just see a bit more consistency game by game. Calling Farigiraf consistent is a little funny. But, again, I'm going off of my experience here. I felt this mon to be very, very easy to use. So yeah, Quaxwell is not being ranked. Quillfish, I'm going in A+. Like, we've used it so much. The most consistent spiker, the most consistent fighting check. Protect, of course, gives you so much leverage, too, against anything that could Terra to try and beat you, or anything that could just, you know, try and switch to another coverage move. Synergizes really well with your Toxic if you run Toxic. Terra of your own, of course, works super well in Quillfish, just like with Muck, how we talked about Terra Dark. That definitely plays into Quillfish as well, being able to Terra Dark against a Metacham or an Indeedee or a Bruxish. And, I mean, hell, you've got a lot of Terra types on Quill that are good. You've got Terra Ground as well, for like Jolteon, if you just want to block the Volt, say, and then get a Toxic off, that could just make it so you don't lose to Jolteon anymore. Terra Steel even, I think, is okay on the Quill. If you want to have like a check to Appleton, or still take Bruxish's Scyfangs a little bit better, same like Metachem's in Headbutt. Rabska, I'm not ranking. I think as a bulky setup sweeper, you have better options. And Revival Blessing, man, it's just not that... It's not worth it. I don't think it's a very good niche at all. It's just... It's a gimmicky kind of thing. And we've yet to see it actually be consistent in any sort of important setting. So, gotta be a little bit lower on it. Raichu, I will keep ranked in C. I do like Nasty Plot Draining Kiss with Terra Fairy. I think it is just good enough at beating some of those, you know, utility special defense mons, like Umbreon Chansey. I'm gonna give it just that little bit extra respect. I'm gonna put both the Rotom forms here, both of these two, in B. I mentioned before why I think Rotom Frost is a little overrated, as I think having to rely on Blizzard to wall break is just terrible. Rotom Spin is here though, because I still value it as a potential Conda answer. Stone Edge isn't doing enough to... It does still nearly to KO you, but it's not the worst move to have to try and take. And being a fight resist also gives you a little bit more chances to find turns to boost or throw off a T-Wave. It's like, it's not hard to find turns to do stuff with this mon, although it is admittedly kind of a poor man's Jolteon, if anything, where you're a pivot that has a lot of Pokemon you threaten out. But once you're in, it's like, I don't feel you really scare as much in the grand scheme, because Jolteon's just so fast. That pool of Pokemon that you consistently threaten out with Jolteon ends up being a lot larger, because you're not just limited to some of the defensive Pokemon you blank. You have a lot of offensive Pokemon too that they gotta worry about getting raw O-code by a T-Bolt. Rotom Spin, I feel like it's a bit more just like, okay, here's some defensive Pokemon. Here's maybe like one or two offensive guys that I do take a hit from full. And they might not want to trade HP. Speed really matters a lot. It really matters a lot when you're talking about how offensive counterplay works out. Oof. And yeah, Rotom Frost. I mean, you'd think that you could probably still make the case for B+. I will not stop you from doing that. Because no Steel types, I mean, it does make Blizzard really spammable. It's just in my experience, you still have enough mons that because they're so bulky, they can actually pivot around your Blizzard. You've got a good few mons that run Protect pretty commonly as well that are trying to switch into you, so stalling out Blizzard is a bit more possible. It does make Nasty Plot very potent on this guy, make no mistake. Being able to plot up on those Protects is very, very nice. But you gotta get the 50-50s. And that can be a little tough at times, especially when you're thinking about like an Umbreon, which just has Yawn, and then you're just forced out immediately, so there's not really a whole lot of great counterplay to that. Regular Rotom. Look at you all the way up in A+. Again, the mon, anything that takes advantage of Sandaconda really well is a friend of mine. And Rotom is just very, very consistent at doing that. Stone Edge has to be run on Sandaconda if you do not want to give a million free turns to Rotom. And, I mean, fact remains, a lot of Sandaconda are running Glare. Glare EQ, Stealth Rock Rest. And so long as that set remains the most common, I think Rotom remains A+. And even if it ever falls off a bit, to where they are running Stone Edge more over Glare, Rotom is still one of the best mons in the tier. Because Nasty Plot sets are really, really good. Terra Fairy helps you check Eel, so I mean, Rotom's great for that. Scarf is a really good set on Rotom. Even faster pivot than Passimian. There's still a lot to like about Rotom, independent of shutting down Conda. Speaking of Conda, yeah, he going up in S and we're not talking about it. Scyther going up in A+. Again, mon's just still as consistent as it's ever been. It's just very trivial to get progress out of. Scyther's an A+. Recent riser to like the very top of the metagame after being kind of toiling around B+, A- for a while. The thing with Scyther is it's probably the best offensive defogger in the tier. Well, it is the best offensive defogger in the tier. It just might also be the best defogger in the tier, because being able to maintain momentum with your fogger is something that a lot of teams can't do otherwise. And like, again, we talked about it when we were putting Drifblim and Lurantis in their spots. These are Pokemon that are kind of easy to exploit just due to their passivity. And although Scyther has some mons that come in and wall it, i.e. like, say opposing Rotom, say like Conda, say like, oh, what was the mon? I literally just was thinking about it. Oh no, Quillfish, there we go. These are mons that can come in on Scyther still after the fact, when it comes in fogs, and say, okay, do something. Scyther is U-turn at least, and it is nice to try and keep these mons on their toes. Especially if you're not being forced to defog at the time. And then of course, SD Trailblaze sets. Those are very, very good. Very easy to get going, really, once you have opposing Xanaconda weekend, because not a ton else is super consistent at beating you. You need like some chip also on a Pokemon like a Rotom or Quillfish. Conda's the main one though. And then even Scarf. I think Scarf is pretty decent. And it's why I rank Hatcham in B+. Hatcham kind of enables those non-boot Scyther sets, and I do think they're still worth exploring. Scovillain I'm not going to rank. Sun just isn't seen. Spidops is awful. Spiritomb I will, with a little reluctance, put it in C. Because at the very least, it shuts down basically every fighting type in the tier. And Calm Mind with T-Spike support is fine. Billy I'm going to unrank. I mean, look, if Honchkrow is struggling, if Braviary is struggling, there ain't no reason to use Squawkabilly. Paldeosaurus, I'm going to put in A. It's the same thing as Scyther with regards to the setup sets. Just very, very, very dangerous, and they don't need a ton weakened or removed outright to get going. My favorite variant to this is definitely Terra Electric with Trailblaze. That set is demonic. It's very consistent as well. And Intimidate gives you a nice amount of just extra setup chances. You can come in against some, stray physical attackers. I mean, you already have plenty that you hard wall, even like Mabosstiff, Lycanroc. You could set up versus a Zoroark if you really chose to. And we've even seen some sub bulk up lately, or even just raw sub. I don't know if they've all been sub bulk up. But sub Paldeosaurus is getting a little bit more exploration. And that adds to it because it means something like Sandaconda can't glare you anymore. It means something like Quillfish can't Toxic you, Rotom can't Wisp you. It really takes away a lot of the potential counterplay to Paldeosaurus, and just makes using them on so much more safe. So much safer when you don't have to worry about getting statused. Because admittedly, a lot of the mons checks, I mean, again, third Drifblim in there too, they all have status, and this mon is useless once it gets statused. So being able to prevent that is really, really useful. I'm just gonna have all these NFEs unranked, by the way. I don't think any of them are good. Croak, A+. Yes, Sandaconda is always annoying if you're physical Croak. Even, like, Rotom can be mildly annoying. Quillfish, even mildly annoying if these mons don't really beat you. That's the thing. They don't really beat you. And something like Drifblim even. Gunk Shot at +2. Now something I want to switch into. Gunk Shot even at +0. Really good against Drifblim because of the poison chance. And once you get the poison on Blim, you're kind of free to SD whenever you want. Because Drifblim is from there struggling to keep up. I forget when the video was. I forget the team I used too. I just recall the only reason I won the game was because I played Croak with the goal of trying to poison the Blim, and once I did, I was fine. And we talk about defensive utility a lot with these Pokemon, why I value some Pokemon that offer a bit of that higher than the just pure wall breakers. Croak being a water immunity is great, because you always switch into Vapo, you always switch into Quillfish. You even check Bruxish, because you prevent the Wave Crash spam. You check Claw, because you prevent Water Pulse spam. And otherwise, I mean, Fight Resistance is nice if you want to set up on Passimian. You've got Terra to make it, you either gain some extra defensive utility by using Terra Dark, which also amps your Sucker Punch. That is really good too. I say the big thing, Terra Fighting with CC. Life Orb Terra Fighting CC at +2. I don't think it always OHKOs Conda, but it comes damn close if it doesn't. Umbreon, it's also going up in A+. Vaporeon's a little annoying when you take Umbreon into account, because I do think Vaporeon's a slightly better mon. And a lot of the things that maybe you'd say, oh, just use Umbreon then. you can make up for with a well-timed Terra from Vapo, and get about the same mileage out of the two. But I like Umbreon because the natural Dark Resist is really good. The natural Psychic Immunity is really good. Being able to check, like Indeedee, Bruxish, Zoroark a bit more reliably, I do think merits a good bit of attention. So, I'm going to rank it up here. Also, I'm making the executive decision as I see how many Pokemon are A+. I'm going to move to Dunsparce and Blim down. I do think they're probably on the lower end of A+, when all is said and done. And although these are still really good Pokemon, I kind of want to represent the Mons that would all be still vying for a spot in S. So, just keep that in mind as we go forward. Ursaring. Nice Ursh. Ursaring is going to go in A. We have seen this Pokemon, whether it's Trailblaze with Bulk Up and Guts, whether it's just, or not Bulk Up and Guts, just straight up Trailblaze, 3 attacks with Flame Orb. Whether it's the specially defensive Bulk Up sets that use a Violite. It really does whatever it wants to pretty darn consistently. It's not the... I still think like it's not the Dunsparce levels of good, even though they're in the same sub-rank. Imagine this is ranked in order, you'd have like this. I'll put Drifblim up here too, why not? Yeah, put it like that. But in spite of that, I feel like a lot of teams often don't have great responses for an Ursaring just starting to bulk up in front of them. Part of this is because our Steel-type usage is so low. You've got Magneton and Berserker as the only viable Steel-types that, aren't something using Terra. And that, that limits the amount of Pokemon that can immediately respond. I think that's partly why you see a lot of Quill as well. It's just really, because having a Poison type is still good because a lot of these Ursaring run mono Play Rough for attacking moves. And you can kind of start dealing with it. The issue for Quillfish, of course, is if you're not Taunt, Ursaring just sets up forever versus you. And in Muck, if you're not Haze, well, Ursaring just sets up forever versus you. And it doesn't have to use its Terra ever. So yeah, you might wall it until it gets to +6 and it sends you back to the Shadow Realm. So it's a very, very particular Pokemon to play against. You kind of have to hope you can force the Terra, because I feel like when it still can keep you guessing is when it's at its strongest. Am I checking it with my Passimian and just trying to CC it 40 miles away into the ocean? Or am I just going to something on my team that's very bulky and can keep up with, the now stab player of? Little tricky, little tricky. Vaporeon. This is going in A+. It is just that consistent. It soft checks a ton, just through sheer bulk, and with Terra, you can even gain an advantageous matchup against a foe like a Zoroark. Or against, Bruxish as well with Terra Dark, you just become more consistent there. I've even seen people run Terra Ground, just so you could have the immunity to, Electric, duh. It's just... it's one of the best glue in the tier. You look at the top 4 Pokemon in S, throw a Vaporeon and one other Pokemon to that is a full team. That's what we mean by when we say it is that good of glue. You can trivialize building to that simple of a way of looking at it, and not really even be, that much worse off for it. Now this one's going to be a bit of a take. Vespiquen like B. It could even be lower. I think Vespiquen's just kind of lost a lot of reason to be used ever since Quill took over as the primary defensive spiker. You know what? I'm gonna do this. Yeah, I really do not think Vespiquen's that good. All it has over Quill really is Roost and U-turn. Otherwise, just use Quill. I think the slow U-turn could be nice on some teams, and Vespiquen's special bulk even does give it at least a little bit of a niche over Quillfish, because Quillfish kind of folds to a gentle gust of wind if it's a special attack. Vespiquen can at least keep up a bit better. Zangoose goes in like B for me. I've talked a lot before about why I don't like Zangoose, but it's just... nothing it does particularly well. You either are Belly Drum, in which case Lamau is not that good of a set from what I've seen, because it's so hard to set up with safely. This Mon is not bulky. Or you're the Toxic Orb boost, Toxic Orb boost. Toxic boost with Toxic Orb set. And you don't beat much? At least not consistently. And so, a lot of games, what it's limited to doing is maybe facading a Conda, doing a lot of damage, and then getting KO'd by the Passimian whenever it decides to come in. I think it just really sucks that, you know, all of the common Scarfers just really, really easily take it out without worrying about what it's going to do back, or even just Revenge Killers in general. Zangoose isn't that, like, quick attack with all those boosts that we mentioned, Toxic Orb, whatever, still doesn't really threaten a lot of these mons as effectively as it needs to. So yeah, beat them on to me. Vivillon, or, oh, I actually skipped over Veluza, wow. Veluza goes in B+. It still feels like it's not consistent enough as a setup sweeper, but, I mean, Fillet Away with Recover has shown to be pretty potent. The amount of Pokemon that safely deal with it is not very high, especially if Veluza has Terra still saved up, because then you can even beat down a Vaporeon if it goes for Terra Dark. It's just, it's more consistent than we thought it would be at first. And you find some good turns to set up against Pokemon like, say, Passimian, Bruxish. Not too bad of a Pokemon. Very much had a glow up compared to where it was looking at the start of the gen. Vivillon will also go B+, although I could easily see it in A-. It's a mon that, again, I forget which one it was that I said earlier. You know, you could ask me, oh, Glaceon, where it's like, you could ask me this question an hour later and I might change my mind. Vivillon could maybe be A- in an hour from now. Just because Sleep Powder, Sub, like, all these moves complicate counterplay to it so much. Sleep Powder in particular, though, because there's not really a dearth of Pokemon that can come in general in 1v1. But what happens when they get Sleep Powdered? And if they stay asleep for enough turns for Vivillon to boost up and then 2-hit KO them before they've got a chance to respond? That really is just the reality of dealing with Vivillon. That one move can make it so much harder. Something like Electros, which otherwise should beat you, might not anymore. You might be able to play against a Rotom if it hard switches in and you sleep it, or even just sub versus it before quivering, and then yeah, Rotom has done nothing. It's just, it's very tricky because of Sleep Powder. But I am keeping it B+, because finding turns to set up, sometimes a little hard, not really that bad, because I do feel a lot of Pokemon just don't threaten you enough to where you can't just set up in their face. You know, say like a Cacturn, or a Conda if it's not got Stone Edge. You've got some prevalent Pokemon that you do get to take advantage of. It's just, a lot of the other ones can still tank your hits, even if they don't resist it. And even if they maybe don't beat you 1v1, they're weakening you quite significantly. They're maybe statusing you along the way and making it easier for something on their team to take you out. That was very scatterbrained. I think I got caught off guard by forgetting about Vivillon. Whiscash. I feel like B- even is too high for it, but I'll put it here for now, because I do think Whiscash at least offers a little bit more as an alternative ground-type option. It's sort of like Camerupt, where it's not much reason to use it, beyond it being a ground-type. That's really all I have to say there. Zoroark, easily A+. We still have so many mons in A+, even when I moved a couple down, but I think it does actually make sense. All of these Pokemon are potent in their own way, and Zoroark is so potent because of Illusion Mind games. Scyther and Passimian are just two elite partners for Zoroark, and they're both really good at drawing in Pokemon that Zoroark just packs up. Quillfish, Rotom, Sandaconda, etc. We did the Zoroark video yesterday. Y'all know how I feel about all the sets. I think Specs is by far the best, and realistically the only one worth consistently considering for teams. But it is so good that it doesn't really matter to me that it's one set. The fact that there are other sets still play into Zoroark's viability. And again, you still have to care about Scarf, you still have to care about Nasty Plot. It's just Specs is so good, a lot of the time you don't care. You just throw the Specs Zoroark on, you're like, okay, I got my Wall Breaker, I've got my Passimian to clean up late game. We're good. It's a very, very strong Pokemon. And often one of the most forcing in terms of making other teams have to Terra. Whether it's making the Umbreon turn into a, Fairy type because it doesn't want to get Focus Blasted. Whether it's making Vaporeon and Muck turn into Dark types, or in Vaporeon's case, sometimes a Fairy type. Making Ursaring turn into a Fairy type. It's just very good at forcing teams to respond to it. Especially if it uses its own Terra to get, like, the super strong Dark Pulse. Of course, Floatzel Rose, Wugtrio is awful. Sawsbuck I'll put in, like, C. I know we, like, ranked it recently at B, but that's just because it was where we last voted it to. Sawsbuck I don't think is good. It's, like, mildly fast enough to where I think with Serene Grace and Headbutt and Swords Dance, it's kind of annoyingly decent, but I think this mon is generally just kind of mid. Charizard, I'm also going to put in, like, B-. I think maybe something with Belly Drum could see some success, but very matchup fishy. Very, very matchup fishy. I think a lot of time for setup, you'd rather just have the Oricorio, because it's more consistent. You don't have to waste half your HP to set up, and naturally doing that makes it a lot easier to revenge kill you in one turn. If your opponent just stays in and says, okay, I'll attack you instead of letting you set up for free. And it's gonna take last mon. I will put it in C. I think it's still viable enough to justify a rank, even if a lot of the time it is kind of outclassed. Because as a T-Spiker, I'm using Muck. As a, Nasty Plot Dark type, I'm using Zoroark. Generally, things do its job better. I think the main thing to Skuntank's credit is it compresses a lot of traits into one slot, and that's at least acceptable enough for me to keep it ranked. Alright guys, I will be right back real quick. I'm going to pause this, and I'm going to look over my list and see if there's anything I want to change real quick. When I unpause it, I'll tell you about any changes. Otherwise, conclude the video. Alright guys, the only change I ended up making was I did move Indeedee from B+ to B. I've just not been too sold on the Pokemon as I've used it, and I do think that the fact so many of its checks could, or not checks, so many of the Pokemon that it normally would beat could just Terra versus it, and already limit its kind of low amount of turns to come in. It kind of sucks for the mon. We'll see. Maybe after the suspect test concludes, if people start using female Indeedee more, and the result of a male Indeedee not getting unbanned result, maybe that makes me feel higher about it. But my experience with the mon frankly matches more with calling it more fringe viable than saying, it's viable to, this degree. But that's it from me. I hope y'all enjoyed this much longer video than normal. Wow. Hour 17 and 56. Incredible. Hope you're all having a lovely day. Hopefully PS is back up soon so we can get back to building, get back to laddering. Until then, though, go touch some grass. I'll catch you next time. Peace.